Hi. Sorry, we had a few technical issues, so I apologize for being late. It's given me another chance to read through all the questions, though, while I was waiting. So hope you can all hear me all right. Um, I've got a little bit of bronchitis, so it won't be a very long session today. I've not slept particularly well the last few nights. um, the questions break down into that you've been sending me. There's some Jane and the Dragon, sort of Dragon Blade questions. Then there's a lot about writing craft. And in fact, the craft writing also, many of the questions around Dragon Blade are also around craft and some of the issues of being a writer. So it might make sense that I focus on some of those, and then I can use some of the questions coming in about Dragon Blade as examples for what are some of the issues you'll face as a writer, that you can't please everybody, and etc., all those sorts of things. So let me rip into it and just start going through some of these questions here. Over the course of several stories, how do you mature a character while keeping their core personality? It's a great question. It's different for obviously different genres. If you're writing a series of books where you know the story arc over a long period of time, then character development is an essential part of the journey. Yet there are other genres, like if you take, like say the Jack Reacher novels, I think of them a bit like a road movie where the character doesn't change. You can read them in any order. He arrives somewhere, discovers an injustice, and then uses all his tools of his skill set to bring about a happy ending for the the guest of that story. So that's kind of the Jack Reacher model, and he doesn't really change in the later novels. So sometimes I know the author's written earlier stories that show some of that early development. Whereas in other series, it's all about character development. It's all about, you just can't read them out of order. With, for instance, the Jane and the Dragon series, the stories that I'll write about her when she's in her 60s are going to be very different stories, and from when she's a young child. And of course, there needs to be massive character development taking place all the way through. The way I've looked at it in my own mind is when she's at the castle, she's developing her sense of her moral compass, what she wants to do. The stories are kind of selfish in that she's fulfilling her dream, and this creates quite a lot of chaos around her amongst her friends. But she's good-hearted and she's doing everything for the right reasons. But it really is all about her at some level. And then the Dragon Blade story is the sudden change in all of that, where no longer is it about Jane. It's about, does she want this role? Does she realize what this role is going to mean and its extraordinary impact on her? And so you've got this massive choice to make. So Dragon Blade is a turning point. So I see the character development that happens throughout the TV series and any novels I write during that period up to the age of Dragon Blade, because in Dragon Blade she's 17, so essentially she's an adult. In medieval times, my gosh, you're an adult at 12, 13, you're getting married and having children and all the rest of it, or not getting married and still having children, because marriage is for the privileged. So there's all of those elements in Jane and the Dragon, but you kind of got to know before you start, right? And if it's for a young TV show, then that character development has to remain fairly consistently episodic. And otherwise, you can resolve a little bit of it in that episode, but and the next episode, it's as if that lesson hasn't been learned, and your characters start afresh. How did the process for starting a show start? And are there any other works you wish were adapted? So for Jane and the Dragon, I'd done all this development before I approached any TV investors and so forth. So I knew the whole world of Jane because I was always going to write it as a series of books. My publisher was approached by producers a few times, and I didn't want other people to produce Jane and the Dragon because it could have gone in any direction, and I didn't know what control I would have over the process. So when we came to making Jane and the Dragon, the discussion with the investors, the Nelvana and Weta and everybody who was getting involved, was that everybody agreed that I would be the showrunner and the executive producer, and would be, if you like, the keeper of the truth about the world and the characters and so forth. And nearly all the work that I and my son Theo and daughter Terry had done prior to Weta and Nelvana coming on board was incorporated into the Bible and became the cornerstone of the show. Are there any other works that I wish that I would love to have adapted? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot of wonderful, wonderful books out there that I would love to adapt into television shows if I could get the rights to them. But the difficulty I face is that I don't have many years left in me, and I don't really want to be adapting other people's work. I really want to focus the creative energy I have left in me to focus on my own stories, because as you know, I've got this other series about the young Ali for my Taking Wonderland, which I've been writing for about 21 years in my head, making notes, etc. And that's a trilogy, but I'm also trying to develop it as I'm writing it as a trilogy of novels. I'm developing it as a primetime drama series in my head, as I have been with Dragonblade, and explore. It's really, I think I mentioned it last time on this live feed, that I see this as series 3 in a primetime drama series. So the first 2 series will be at the castle, and all the kind of the chemistry that we're familiar with in the TV show, but aged up, where she's 17 and she's it's a lot darker. And of course, it becomes very dark with Dragonblade, as it should. It's a very interesting age and a series of decisions that Jane is making. So next question is it's a writing class question. Thank you. How far ahead have you already written Dragonblade? Is it complete when you release it periodically, or do you have a plan outline, write, then release the chapter? Or is it something else? I ask because in my experience, some plot points have appeared later on in a story while I was writing. Either I accidentally foreshadowed it, or I realized something that requires me to go back and on something I've already written. So that's, and then there's a little bit more to this question, but it's, and I'll ask the part 2 in a second. With Dragonblade, I knew the overall story, but I didn't know the elements. One of the reasons for releasing it a chapter at a time was to put pressure on myself to write it. I'm a very fierce editor. I edit and edit and edit and edit my work, and that's actually probably one of my biggest weaknesses. I can spend so much time editing that I never release a book. So in many ways, I thank you all for your forbearance with me, that releasing it one chapter at a time gave me, I guess, the best of both worlds in a way. It allowed me to focus on the story, focus on really not giving up the craft side of it, but not making the craft side of it the imperative that held me back. Normally I polish and polish and polish. So in answer to some of your other questions, that answers some of the other questions that here is that will I be polishing it before I publish it? Yes, definitely. A lot of polishing. To your other question there, were there pieces that I discovered and I wish I'd put in earlier? I didn't discover them because I knew all the elements, but I would have spent more time seeding some of the characters early. And also I wanted to bring in Jane's mother and father. It was a whole plot line around, not really a plot line, but the relationship between her mother and the Queen wanting her mother to put more pressure on Jane to start not influencing Lavinia with too many stories of heroism and Boudica and what have you, because Princess Lavinia is starting to be, completely in awe of Jane, and so there was that whole Lavinia, Jane's mother plot line that I realized that was getting in the way of the story moving forward, and it's Jane's story and Jester's story and the introduction of Robert. So yes, I would want to add in more. Now that comes back to some of these other questions, which again, it's really so helpful that you're asking these in terms of the craft. Some of you have been concerned that it appears there's a big age gap between Robert and Jane. In my mind, it's 3 years. So remember, Jane's 17, so she's a young woman, and Robert I see as 20, maybe 21. So while yes, it's an uncomfortable age gap. There's a power imbalance there, and if this was in a contemporary setting, the age is probably a little bit too great. But this isn't. And the other piece I wanted to, I'll go back and thank you for all your notes, is to make it really clear, because it's obviously not clear enough, that yes, Jane's fascinated by him, but she's not interested in him. He never set out to be interested in her. He's somebody who is utterly committed to protecting Dragon, and he believes that he's destined to be the Dragon Blade, which he thought was his father's role, and he's been essentially learning all the as much as he can about the history and what forth, and yet he wants to know whether he's going to. But is it really him, or is it this girl? Is it this kid? As far as his mind is. So he wants to find out if he's unselfish. His true motive is what's best for Dragon, and if she's best for Dragon, if Dragon has chosen Jane, then his job is to step out of the way. But then, as he says, at one point I came here to test you and make sure you're the real deal, or I was going to probably dispatch you and take over the role myself. But he's, I guess, not romantically involved. That's not how it's supposed to come up. But he just suddenly she's a real person. She's not just a theoretical girl that could be the Dragon Blade. She's this incredible, feisty, amazing young woman, and he's, I would say, more intrigued by her and captivated by her energy and the sense of who she is. And it hasn't developed into a romantic interest from his point of view. For Jane, it's just confusion, because what the hell is this guy? Why is he doing it? What's going on here? So it mirrors the confusion that I felt when I was younger, and all the rest of it around what are the motivations of these people around me, and how do I keep myself safe, and until I understand the true nature of their and so it's really for Robert to prove that he's a good guy, isn't it? That's what I was trying to do in here. And if I haven't got that quite right, that's your questions are telling me that I've made it feel a bit more romantic than I intended it to be. So I can start dialing that back now for the novel, because that isn't the intention. I need Robert. He's somebody who is going to be coming when she leaves the castle. None of the other cast, apart from Theodore, can leave. Gunther's gone, of course, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But Jane's heading off on these series of adventures. But I wanted there to be some character that understands that what she's doing and why she's doing it, that can coincide with her story as she goes into the next phase of her series of adventures. And also then, as Jane goes on these adventures, she is going to fall for people. There are going to be romances with the people she meets on these journeys that are going to test her. So in answer to one of the other questions, yes, there are going to be romantic entanglements, and she's got to figure out what her destiny is and whether it's a bit, I guess I don't know how to compare this really, but I suppose it's a bit like, if a young lady is going to take her vows and become, married, to use that sort of Christian sense to Jesus, and give up all the sort of secular life and devote herself to Christ. Is that if a young lady's going to do that, and at the same time she's starting to fall in love with a bloke out in the village, that dynamic's been explored in a lot of stories, and what's her commitment to herself, to her, to her faith and all that. And in this case, Jane's faith is, if you like, the preservation of dragons, the survival of a species, and does that outweigh her personal needs? So that's the big story that we're moving towards. So, do I have advice for someone considering serial publishing online? Should I absolutely wait till I'm an established author? I don't want to. I'm aware I'm likely sacrificing the chance of a publisher will pick me up. My thoughts are it's already hard to get traditionally published, so I might as well build a readership on a story on the internet. Look, I did a really long post on TikTok last week around this, because I think it's really important. It's really important to know why you're writing something. Okay, it's why you're becoming a writer. If you want to become a writer to make money, then really I suggest it's a poor game plan for life, because it's an absolute hit and miss gamble whether you're going to actually make a living from this. So if you're a passionate writer, then really it's about not being a writer, not being a published writer, and oh my goodness, da, da, da. It's about finding the audience that loves what you do. And then, so I agree with really what I'm hearing in your question here is, what should I do? I think that self-publishing through whatever medium, I'm not going to promote sort of Kindle over Patreon or over, et cetera, but building an online audience and using the dialogue with that audience, just as I'm doing with Dragon Blade, to help me make the book as good as it can be, which is why I don't get upset by any of the questions you've asked, by the way, and I'll come to those, because it's so good for me to get that feedback. I would suggest you just get on with it. I would not wait for getting the book absolutely perfect, absolutely the way you want it. I think publishing is moving into a new era where you have a lot more relationship and dialogue with your readers, a lot more kind of creative companionship with your readers. That also makes it less insular. I was going to say lonely, because it's not lonely. You're living with all these characters, but insular in the sense that you will emerge with the book fully written, and then the publisher will become your editor, and the publisher will give you feedback, and based on their knowledge of what works in the marketplace and some of the things, some of the potholes that you need to avoid. Okay, so yes, I would just publish. And the great thing is that if a book is really successful, you can do a publishing deal later. It's not, a lot of books get published by mainstream publishers based on it building a groundswell following. I'll just quickly then go. I'm going to jump now to some of the other questions that have. I won't go to specifics, but quite a few of you are around the same. I've covered off the is it appropriate for a 17-year-old to have a relationship with a guy who's 20? Thank you for those questions, because clearly it has not felt right or not felt comfortable for some of you, and that's fantastic feedback. So I'm going to, as I write the novel out, I'm going to make sure that I don't make that mistake. I don't want it to feel like this is an age inappropriate relationship taking place here. So thank you for that. Some of you I've had a few questions about domestic violence and domestic abuse and the Gunther story. And one of you said, obviously, clearly, I've had no experience of that, or I wouldn't write such a thing. So I'll come to that in a moment. But again, on writing craft, the truth is, when you're a writer, you're writing a drama that involves lots and lots of characters, and you'll do your research as best you can on every element that you might want to be in there. But at the end of the day, these characters fulfill a position in the story, and Gunther's father, the merchant, is a very powerful, overbearing, dominant, and really kind of very unpleasant guy, and we know that from the TV show. It was all dialed down in the TV show, but we knew that he was very overbearing to Gunther, but I couldn't push that too far for that age group. Yes, I have done a lot of research into, and I'm sorry for this one, the one particular person asking the question. Clearly, this is something that's deeply upsetting in your life, and I hope you can find support and help, because yes, it's a massive issue. I got to understand it. I've been writing a book called Dragon Island, which is about violence, and teachers and caregivers and social workers had been looking for a book that can talk about violence and domestic violence to very, very young children. So you've got a book in the classroom that if a teacher realizes something's going on, there's a book there, because sadly, every child then in that class is affected by the domestic violence. If one child comes in, bruised and battered, or is missing from class, and there's a very difficult line that teachers have to draw between helping the rest of the class understand what's going on, but also keeping the privacy for that individual. So very often you need a book that doesn't deal with it specifically about this child over here, but raises it as a topic. And as a result of that, yes, I got to understand. While it wasn't in my own personal life, I got to meet a lot of people and worked with groups like Child Matters here in New Zealand and a bullying foundation and so forth, and worked with the Commissioner of Children, who launched the book, which is called Dragon Island. I'm relaunching it soon because it's I've just got the rights back from Scholastic, because I want to take control of a different kind of promotional approach to it, where I'm focusing it on how it will get used in a women's refuge, when you're discussing with young children why they've had to move out of the family home away from dad. So I'm sorry if that particular storyline was not. It opened up a wound for you. So that will always happen with every book, with every record, with every piece of music, with every film. That anybody who has a scar is going to have that scar rubbed open, accidentally or intentionally, when they come across a piece of drama that explicitly touches on that. So in terms of writing craft, you are never, ever going to be a writer without upsetting some people, because you can't. you can't make your book or your novel safe for everybody. I'll give you a soft example of this. When I was doing the TV show, they got a furious email came into Nirvana, my production partner in Canada, and they would send all these questions were coming. They'd send to me because I was the showrunner and the creator of the show and had to, ran all the scripting process and gave final sign off to every script. So they said I hadn't done my research on how children are supposed to get onto ponies because Jane mounts the horse from its right flank. She throws her left leg over and mounts on the right side. And this equestrian teacher was saying, how could you do this? We're teaching children you have to mount from the left-hand side. And it was a very reasonable question because, in some equestrian circles, particularly in pony clubs, all horses are taught that way so that if anybody coming on, they can always mount the horse on a strange horse at a pony club or an adult riding club or a trekking course. It means the horse isn't going to be spooked. You get up on the left-hand side and all the rest of it. But of course, we did a massive amount of research back in Jane's day. The reason most people get on a horse from the left-hand side of the horse, put the left foot in the stirrup and swing the right leg over is because they're right-handed. And therefore their sword is coming down through their and hanging over their left hip, right? Because you pull it out like that. So if you're right-handed, yes, you get on the left-hand flank of the horse and the pony, because then your scabbard doesn't, just sits there by your left leg as you swing your right leg over and doesn't get dragged. Whereas if you got on the other way around, you'd be lifting your scabbard up, dragging it across the flank of the horse, spooking it. It may be even sitting on it. And then you're in a whole world of pain, as is the horse. So left-handed people, and Jane's left-handed, mount their horses from the right-hand side. And in a lot of equestrian circles now, and my wife and daughter and myself rode, and we were in an adult riding club. And there was certainly here in New Zealand, whether you do a lot of trekking in some difficult country, it's very, very important that you teach your horse that you can mount from both sides. Because if you're in a situation where you can't get on that one side, you need to be able to get on the other side. If you're down on a side of a mountain on a narrow path and something's gone wrong and you've all had to get off your horse and got to get back on again, you can't turn the horse, whatever. It's very important that the horses are taught that you can get on from either side without it spooking them. So that's still a debate in different countries around the world. But I wrote a big email back to this lady and explained what was going on. And she was wonderful. And she started actually using that in her own pony club to teach all the ponies to be able to be ridden from both sides. But I guess what I'm saying is you do as much research as you can. You try to get as many things right as you can, but you're always going to make mistakes. I've made mistakes in the kitchen with, some of the medieval cooking and all the rest of it. Then I had people thinking I'd made a mistake about having potatoes, long before potatoes arrived in Europe in the real world. Of course, in my alternative history, where some things are similar, but some things aren't. Dragon's been getting potatoes from Central America, and he's been all over the world. He predated Columbus. So. Anyway, moving on, lots of questions here. So I think that covers some of the questions about things that people were feeling uncomfortable about. Some of you have written some very specific questions, so I'll try and answer them separately because you're asking me about. I'm not using names here, but thank you for this one. Jane the Dragon was a show that made me want to go into animation for the sake of storytelling. Early on, I made a vow that I was going to bring the show back somehow. I'm nearing the end of my university career and learning the animation industry and ways of production and copyright are a little more complicated than 12-year-old me thought. I think that little vow is my most liked comment underneath one episode on YouTube. That being anyway, so then you asked me a very specific question, which is about rights and so forth, which I'll, if you could send that to me as a separate email as a comment, I think you have actually, but I'll go back to it and I'll write back to you about the graphic novel. So thank you. So what is Jester's real name? We will find out. I mean, this is, as Jane's now leaving the castle, there are two impetuses for her. One is, and I'm not spoiling anything because the final chapter is really wrapping up all the storylines. Before the king throws her out, or the queen asks the king to ask her to leave because of the influence, it's all starting to get very heavy for the castle, and Dragon's now creating more problems than he's solving. So Theodore says to Jane, listen, before you're thrown out, I think now's the time to go to the king and seek permission to go after the merchant and to try and bring him back for justice, and to see if you can find, save, or at least see what's happened to Gunther. So that way Jane isn't kind of banished. She's able to save the king from making that decision, resolves the fact that the queen thinks she's a bad influence now, Lavinia, and is leaving on her own terms for her own reasons. And it can then obviously can still come back, so I can still, incorporate R&R vacations coming home, between adventures and so forth, and keep tabs on the other characters. But I needed not just the bigger story arc, but I need something very specific and very personal to take her off on this adventure. That could be the, if you like, the thread of the next series or the next novel, so that she can have these individual adventures, a bit like a road movie, where she comes across a problem, resolves it with her skills and her particular Jane attitude to life, and with the dragon, but is finding out also more information about dragons, but most of all, she's following a breadcrumb trail to try and find Gunther, find out if he's still alive, what's happened to him. And that really is the meat in the sandwich of the next story. So she'll have adventures on the way, but this finding Gunther is, if you like, the breadcrumb trail. But also the thing she not most wants to do, but also wants to do, is find the traveling players that dropped Jester off all those years ago, to find his mother and father, to tell his story to them so they can be proud of everything he accomplished, and then to find his real name and bring the name home so it can be on, it can be in the ballad that she wants to have written about the life of Jester. So she's determined to find his name, and does, and we will find out what Jester. So yes, we will discover Jester's real name. Why didn't the other knights try to help Gunther in the dealings with Magnus? They kind of do, right? So we've got the Jane and the Dragon when she's 12 years old in the castle in the TV show, where it's kind of soft and we don't really deal with the abusive father bit of Gunther, or overpowering father. And then we've got the two series and the novels I want to write that precede Dragon Blade. And so a lot of these issues around Gunther and why Sir Theodore is starting to, put so much effort into helping him become the best version of himself Gunther can be. And the other knights, how they do try to rally around and help as much as they can. But it also comes down to Gunther's. He's not really asking for help. He doesn't trust. You can see that. You saw that in the early days. He's somebody who's very scarred by whatever's happened to him. We're going to discover a lot of that, and he's kind of got this personal mission to take his father down. And if he gets it wrong, this is not something you can chat to the other knights about, etc. Because if he's wrong, he's going down himself bad. So anyway, that's kind of a lot of the elements that will be in the two novels or the two series that will precede this one. So next question. So I'm realizing I haven't got to a lot of these. Yeah, one of you's written about why you wanted that you were hoping this book would focus more on dragon lore, like the series, and have Jane out there kicking butt, but that she's being swept along by the plot and by fate. Yeah, she is. You're absolutely right, and I'll try. Thank you for that note, and I'll try and make her a little bit less of a cork on the ocean of this story. But where this story sits is up until now, she's been the stories that will precede this one is she's becoming very, very strong, very, very assertive. And I think that scene in the tavern hints at how Jane's established herself within this community in the village as the kick-ass go-to person everybody looks up to in Capernia. This story, in my mind, is a transitional story where she goes, the world's more complicated than I thought, and I wanted her to be confused. That whole confusion about what is going on here, why is this happening, who is this guy, and what's all this stuff about Dragon Blade, and all the certainties she had, which we will experience before this, are being swept away in this. And I know this person who's written this question doesn't like the book, doesn't like the fact that Jane is not the strong center of the story. But yeah, I'm sorry. That is what the book is. Hopefully you'll like her in the few books coming up where she's a lot stronger. I've had the same commentary too, by the way, about Ali in the Wonderland book, that a lot of the particularly great, I'm getting lovely reviews on Amazon and Goodreads and so forth. But there have been a couple of reviews where people have said, I don't like this girl. No, she's a real pain in the arse. Well, she is. I mean, she is a pain in the arse. Ali is and she needs to be, because we get, and then as they say, oh, I realize and I get to like her by the end of the first book, or I get to understand her, I might not like her. But she is propelled by scars, and she's got life rage, that life rage she's hurling at everybody who she cares for in the Taking Wonderland series. So so many of your questions are more about Jester's real name. Well, what was? After their observations on Earth, what does Spotty What and Dotty What finally turn into when they return to their home planet? I don't actually know. I haven't made that decision. If we ever get to make that series where they do come back, my idea was that they would then explore the planet What and meet all the uncles and aunts, and Uncle Bill's become half hippopotamus and half, I don't know, some alien squid from another planet. And he explains why those attributes are things that he's attracted to and why he has become what he wants to be. So the series becomes about the celebration of diversity and the acceptance of a diversity and all of those things which are really important to as an age group discussion. But what they actually become, I still don't know. Have I considered an audio version of Dragon Blade using the surviving cast of Jane and the Dragon? That's a really interesting question. No, I haven't. I know I can do it as an audio podcast, but I don't think I could afford. I don't think I could afford it. I'm having to finance these things themselves, and there's no necessary income coming from these. So, and I couldn't ask them to do it for nothing. So it's a lovely idea. And if maybe there's a way to do it by subscription. Let me look into that. It says, I've about the mostly female following of the show, as I'm sure, at least hope you're aware, the majority of the audience, both those who watch the show and whether or not is predominantly female. What message are you trying to send us in writing this novel? I'm not really trying to send a message. I have to be honest. This isn't an issue-driven book or message-driven book, and I think it's at an age where when I was doing the original books, because I did really pissed off with all the female leads in fairy stories. I want to write a modern fairy story. Talked about this a lot, so I won't go over this here. But where you don't marry the prince in order to fulfill yourself. So I wanted to have this girl who becomes follows her dreams to become a knight. So that was the idea behind the original book. But then as I got to write that, I got to think about her world, and then I included this Last Dragon environmental story in it. The big issue was about live for something bigger than yourself. Don't be completely self-centered about everything you do. If there's value to be had in life, it's about the impact you have on other people. But obviously, as a young person, you're carving out your own identity. You're trying to find your place in the world, and so the original picture book was very much about girls don't put up with, think that marriage is going to be the answer to everything, because that's just rubbish. So it was all about that for young kids. But then as I got to Dragonblade, it's not about a message necessary to young women. It's about everybody, really. And I'm excited that there are so many men that enjoy, and boys enjoy Chain of the Dragon, though it is predominantly women, as you say. I'm not trying to make this any messages to girls or young women. I don't feel it's appropriate for a guy in 70 to be doing that. The only thing I can do is to write about things that I passionately care about, and that's not gender specific. That is to do with what makes for a meaningful life, what makes for a caring person, what makes for adding value to the world in a time when there's a lot of self-centered, inward-looking entitlement happening around the world. That is at the absolute opposite of what can I do for the world? How can I help save the planet? How can I persuade others that plastic is a really, really bad thing? So those are the issues that I care about. And so this story was not gender specific in that regard. It was about, this story is about something much bigger than yourself is at stake here. Do you have the courage to pick up that burden? So what led you to start writing Dragonblade when you did? As I say, it was. A lot of people have been going, when the series stopped, is when are the novels coming out? Can you write them, and so forth? But I've been so very, very busy. So in my professional life, with my other shows and my commitments to my company, that writing my own books and so forth has been a much harder to take the time. So really, it's a time issue. The stories have been developing in my head all this time. The Alice in Wonderland story has been in my head for years and years. I found the first notes I wrote about it were back in the mid-70s. So go figure. That's a lot longer than the 21 years I've often talked about. Um, so in Jester Justice, here's another question. We briefly see inside Jester's room and we see creepy wall marks behind him. And in concept art, there's room is a lot of full of obscure items, not plants, scrolls, statue. What other things we might have seen in Jester's room? Does he have keepsakes from his family? We were going to develop all of that more as we built the series. And so when we did the early designs, um, we were doing all designs that kind of spoke to the personality of the person. And Chester is a collector of knowledge. He's a thoughtful guy. So he's very, very interested in cultures from all around the world. So what's on his walls was the idea was to give a sense of that if whenever the camera moved in there, but not be necessarily too specific about any of those items. But as the stories developed, we would be able to then have specific things in that room that could speak to that storyline. So that's we never built his room. We could never afford to. There were a lot of rooms in the castle we couldn't afford to build for the show. Look, it's come to thank you all so very much indeed. That's the end of this session. Got a bit of a sore throat with bronchitis, so I'm going to leave it there. But thank you all very much indeed. I really do appreciate the tougher questions too, about because those of you who want to become a writer, accept that you're not going to please anybody. But when people are passionate enough to write to you about something they don't like about what you've done, take it really seriously. Don't just dismiss it. Don't dismiss it as, oh, that's not what it's about, and why are they saying that? These are people who've fallen in love with your characters and your work. They have an insight into what's important about it because you've stirred something in them, and in the end, it becomes a shared experience. I'm not maybe I'll last another 10 years, maybe till I'm 80. Maybe I've got 3 or 4 more books in me in that time frame, while I can still enjoy being a dad and a grandfather and all the other things. So these books are going to hang around long after I've gone, and I want them to mean something. I want them to be loved enough that other people might want to then pick up the pen and continue with Jane's adventures and stories. So everybody who writes in, and then with a concern about what I've done, I've taken your points really seriously, and I will try to make sure that I can finesse Dragon Blade in some of those key areas where I have not done enough to explain a moment, and that it's left you wondering what I intended by it. So thank you for those questions. I really appreciate it. Thank you all again for your time today, and I look forward to the next one. Cheers. Bye-bye.